Good morning, everyone. My name is Derek Redmond, and today I will be introducing our keynote speaker. Nana Dr. Chike Akua is an associate professor of higher education leadership at Clark Atlanta University and one of the most sought-after speakers at urban schools, colleges, universities, and educational conferences. As a former underperforming student who struggled in high school, Dr. Akua understands the process of personal and cultural transformation to inspire today's students. Dr. Akua is the author of 12 books in total, producer of a series of historical videos online, and 70 Black history and African proverb posters, along with Reading Revolution Online. A culturally relevant web-based academic support tool that increases comprehension, vocabulary development, grammar, and writing skills. Dr. Akua's most recent book included Honoring Our Ancestral Obligations, 7 Steps to Black Student Success in Kepra, Ancient Kemetic Concepts, and Education and Transformation. Dr. Akua earned a doctorate in educational policy studies at Georgia State University, a Master's of Arts degree in education with a concentration in school counseling from Clark Atlanta University, and has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in English education from Hampton University. Dr. Akua has been featured in Ebony magazine and most recently in Black Enterprise and the Washington Post for his work as an innovative educational leader. He has helped over 1,000 students and parents on trips throughout Egypt, Ghana, Senegal, and Morocco through the African Genesis Institute. In 2022, Dr. Akua was installed as a Chief Ghana and given the name Nana Akpa, meaning leader with heart, spirit, and soul. Dr. Akua is the father of 2 sons and resides just outside Atlanta, Georgia in the U.S. with his wife of 30 years. Now we will be having Dean English and Mr. Dr. Akua for a little talking session with you all.
Come on, y'all. We can get a little more than that. First and foremost, I want to thank the staff that are helping us today, Bavesi and my other buddy over there. Thank you so much. Well, Dana and Dove, really appreciate their assistance this morning. I'm real excited, y'all, to have Dr. Akua here on campus. I've known him since 22 personally. Man, I'm amazed at all the work that you have done, not only in education, but just in general as a man. So I'm really happy to be here. And thank you all for being here. And thank you all for being so patient. We wanted to start a little earlier, but that's how things happen. But I was thinking about this yesterday, Dr. Akua, especially with all the movies and the coverage of the inauguration yesterday. We honored a great man yesterday in MLK and his legacy, whether we also celebrated, or not celebrated, we had an inauguration of our new president yesterday. And I'm just wondering how you feel when honoring a great man, but then kind of honoring a not so great man.
It's kind of the irony of being in America and being American, right? When you ask how I feel concerned, but I also feel encouraged. I feel concerned because I think that the general public doesn't have a good grasp of how things happen slowly and incrementally. They say the best way to kill a frog is to put it in some lukewarm water and turn up heat slowly. And it doesn't realize that is being cooked until it's too late. And I feel like the heat has been turned up over these past several years, and we're regressing as a nation. And the level of complacency is concerning as well, because I think I saw a statistic that 36% of the population didn't vote. So that's very significant. So no matter how disillusioned we may be with American politics, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, we can never become so complacent as to relinquish the right to vote that our ancestors sacrificed so much for. Voting isn't everything, but it is something, and we ought to exercise that. So I'm concerned, but I'm also encouraged because in the work that I do, I have never structured the work that I do in transforming the lives of young people. I have never based that on who was in the White House. I have particular feelings about who I would like to be in the White House, but it has never stopped or slowed my work. As a matter of fact, in situations like this, it intensifies the work. So that's how I feel. And lastly, let's say thank you so much, Dean English, for inviting me to be here with you all, and Dr. Cruz Soto for helping to plan this event.
Sure, thank you. I want to get into the legacy and the relevance of Dr. King. So how do you see Dr. King's vision of justice, equality, and nonviolent resistance resonate in today's racial climate, particularly the ongoing social and political challenges?
Sure. I think one of the first things that comes to mind when we examine the life of Dr. King is his deep, deep, deep sense of purpose. I don't know if you're aware of this, but when he graduated from Boston University with his doctorate, he could have kind of just drifted into a very comfortable life. He could have been the chosen Negro to be in certain positions of power, be a college professor, or even a pastor up north, but he intentionally went back down south in the heat of the fire. And that, to me, speaks to a deep and abiding sense of purpose that he had. Of course, he did his undergraduate work at Morehouse College, one of our great HBCUs, and then he goes to Crozier Theological Seminary to gain further insights on what was called the social gospel. In other words, taking the message from the pages of the Bible and applying it to everyday life, not just as an individual, but as a society and as a community. So that deep and abiding sense of purpose is, I think, something that all of us have to take a very, very careful look at. Because what I noticed is that in America, Dean English, if you don't know your purpose, someone will assign a purpose to you. You don't know your purpose? Oh, fine. Well, your purpose is to populate the prison industrial complex. You don't know your purpose? Oh, fine. Then your purpose is to be a consumer, hyper-consumer, never saving, never investing, just buying everything, taking the money. The money never stays in your account. It's just transferred from your account to other people's accounts. If you understand what I'm saying, please say Ashe. Okay. So this sense of purpose, if you don't know your purpose, this society will assign you a purpose. You have to be very intentional about what your purpose is for being here. But most of us end up, because of skillful media manipulation and miseducation, we end up being a wandering generality rather than a person who has been significantly chosen for a powerful purpose and mighty mission. And so if there's one thing that I could say to everybody before you leave here today, if you don't already know, seek to find what your purpose is for being on the planet. And it might not be revealed right away. It may take some time. You may have to turn off the TV, turn off the phone, turn off any external stimuli, and allow something within to speak to you about who you are, whose you are, and where you come from, and what you're here to do. And that deep sense of purpose is something that Martin Luther King demonstrated very, very thoroughly. All of his adult life, all the way to the end. And we are blessed as a result of the fact that he lived his purpose.
Thank you. We have college students here today. We're on the campus of Riverside City College, and this question is about our college students. Dr. King's leadership in the civil rights movement inspired young people to take action. In what ways can college students draw from his legacy to address racial inequities on campuses and in their communities?
So the first thing that we have to do, and this may sound strange, but the first thing we have to do is read. There's no getting around that. Everybody say readers are leaders. And leaders are readers. Now, you know what they say in our community. If you want to hide something from black people, put it in the book because they'll never read it. How is it that the people that introduced the world to reading and writing, language, and literature, coming out of the Nile Valley of Africa thousands of years ago, how is it that that group of people doesn't read as much as they should? How is it that our ancestors fought just to have the right to read, literally sacrificed their livelihood and possible mutilation, getting a finger or a hand cut off if you were caught reading or caught with a book. How is it that our ancestors went through those kind of sacrifices, but we don't want to read now? There's something to that. So readers are leaders and leaders are readers. One of the first things that we have to do is we have to read because, you've heard it before, those that don't know history are what? Doomed to repeat it. Well, how the hell are you going to know history if you won't read? And then you have to do as Malefi Asante has said, take 2 sets of notes. 2 sets of notes. The first set of notes is the notes that your professor requires of you. The second set of notes is the notes that your ancestors require of you. You're going to have to read outside of class. Which I feel like I earned 2 doctorates because for every assignment my professors were giving me in graduate school, I was reading outside of that because I knew what they were giving me was not enough. Ashe? So for every assignment, I'm reading, I'm trying to find out, well, what do black scholars have to say on this subject? What does Asa Hilliard have to say about this in his book, Seba, The Reawakening of the African Mind? What does Maulana Karinga have to say about this in Introduction to Black Studies? What does Marimba Ani have to say about this in her book, Urulu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior? For every assignment, I'm reading a different book to find out what our scholars are saying because oftentimes, far too often, our scholars have been left out of the equation. Yep. And so that's one of the first things. And Dr. King's life and legacy bears this out. He was not only a minister and an activist, he was a scholar. He was a scholar. He was such a scholar that he says, not only am I going to lead a movement, I'm going to produce the literature for that movement. So many of us may have read something about Dr. King, but have we read his work in his own words? So that's the first order. Anybody who seeks to create change, anybody who wants to see a difference, you have to educate yourself on the issues. Educate yourself from your perspective and your those that are against you. Educate yourself on their perspective so that you can effectively advocate on your behalf. I think that's the most important thing that we have to do to carry on.
In what ways has Dr. King's work influenced modern movements like Black Lives Matter? And how do you think he will respond to the racial and social justice issues of today?
I think his work deeply informed and inspired a lot of what Black Lives Matter was doing. When you look at the way that they were organized, when you look at the marches and demonstrations that took place and everything, all of that comes out of the Black freedom struggle of the 50s and 60s. But here again, we have to update some of the things that were done way back then in terms of our approach today. And so I think there needs to be a multi-pronged approach. When we look at the issues that we're facing today, one of the big concerns that I have is that we have to understand the difference between protest and production. Protest and production. What do I mean by that? One of the few Black leaders that we've been taught about in American public school and even private school curriculum is Dr. King, okay? But what happens in the process is we think everything that happens, we got to march. Let me just let that sit there for just a second. And marching does have a purpose. It is to call attention to an undesirable situation and call people to action. But that was not the end-all, be-all thing. That was just a step in the process. When I say we need to understand the difference between protest and production, there are some things that if we produce them in our community, there would be no need to protest about.
Right.
So if we're upset that we're the last hired, first fired, glass ceiling, then we wouldn't have to protest about that if we created more businesses and began hiring ourselves. Ashe? If we're upset about police brutality, if we policed our own communities and had a certain standard of behavior, then we wouldn't have to protest as much about police brutality if we policed our own communities better. Ashe? So this isn't to let anybody off the hook. This is not to let racists and white terrorists off the hook for what they've done to us, but it is to call us to account and to call us to self-determination to do for ourselves what others cannot and will not do for us. So that's one of the ways that I see that we have to evolve the methods that were used back then for what we're doing today.
And just a side note for everyone here, will receive your book. Can you just tell us a little bit about this book? Because everyone in the audience today will get a copy of that book.
Sure. The title of this book is called Kepra, Ancient Kemetic Concepts in Education and Transformation. Kemet refers to ancient Egypt. Kepra is an ancient Kemetic or Egyptian symbol that has deep symbolism for what we all go through at one time or another in our lives. It's a scarab beetle that lays its eggs in a ball of dung, in a ball of waste material. You say, well, why would a loving mother lay its eggs in a ball of dung? Well, it does that for two reasons. For one, protection. The egg is protected from predators, from outside predators. And the ball of dung serves as incubation to keep it warm, okay? But that ball of dung represents and symbolizes when we experience negative circumstances in our lives. One of the things that the ancient priests and professors of Kemet noticed when they observed the scarab beetle, every single one, they would push this ball of dung in the exact direction of the rising sun. And they didn't worship the sun, but they recognized the sun as an emanation of the power of the Most High. So pushing this ball of dung in the direct path of the sun represented walking in the path of light, wisdom, and illumination. And once it did that, then those eggs would then hatch and rise up out of the ball of dung. It represents transcending negative circumstances and becoming your highest self. Ashe?
Ashe.
And so this idea of Kepra meaning becoming, the question that it requires of us is, what are you becoming individually? And what are we becoming as a community? And what are we becoming as a nation? What are we becoming as a humanity? So I think probably the most important chapter in this book for you all to read would be the first chapter, and is because it tells the story of my journey as an African scholar. And my hope and my prayer is that it will make each and every one of you to reflect on your journey in terms of what your purpose here is on planet Earth. And then there are a number of other historical and spiritual concepts in the book that will help you on your journey as well.
All right, appreciate that. I only have one more question, and then we're going to have the audience ask you a few questions. We have members of our All African Diaspora Education Summit team here, as you were a pivotal part of that conference. At the heart of our project is students. We want to make sure that African American students have what they need to be successful and have support systems around them to be successful. So one is study abroad, and then another part of our project is healing and restoration for our campus. We have a lot of folks on campus that have on-the-job trauma. We want to make sure that we are working together to solve that trauma. So I'm wondering, Dr. King believed in transformative power of education. How can colleges and universities better honor his legacy by fostering an inclusive environment that empowers students from marginalized communities?
Sure. Well, first, since you mentioned the study abroad, shameless plug for my Egypt trip. We're doing a study tour this summer. We would love to have you all on that trip. But in terms of what we must do, I want you to read the last part of that question again, because I want to make sure I answer correctly.
How can colleges and universities better honor Dr. King's legacy by fostering inclusive environments that empower students from marginalized communities?
Inclusive practices. So one of the things is, first of all, to set the proper policies, and then those policies should flow into practices and procedures. So there are a lot of colleges and universities and corporations and organizations that have flowery language as it relates to policy. But then when it comes to practices and procedures, the ball is dropped. But in the current administration that's just come in, they're coming in knocking down policies as well. The policy production process is challenging enough. So when there are certain policies that are written and in place, you as knowledgeable students, faculty, staff, and leadership have to then hold people accountable and have some uncomfortable conversations. So you have to know what your rights are. And a lot of times what you have to do is make sure that when a situation arises, that you don't allow yourself to be isolated, that to attack an issue, you must do so in unity with other like-minded brothers and sisters. Ashe? If you're doing something individually, what happens is we get alienated and isolated, and we feel we're the only one experiencing this. You must understand that one of the first tactics of those who sought to enslave our people was divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. And then once we were brought here, you couldn't have more than 2 or 3 people to be gathered at any one time for fear that there would be a revolt. And so one of the things we have to do is make sure we're not going to agree on everything, but there are certain things that we should agree on. And we should be unified in our approach in making sure that we advocate on behalf of what's in the best interest of the community. The last thing I want to say about that is we're still in the process of overturning Eurocentric curricula. So when you matriculate into the new semester, one of the first things that you should do is look at the syllabus for the classes that you're taking. Look at the readings that you have. Look at the bibliography that you have. Look at the topics that are discussed. And ask yourself, is my community represented? Is their perspective represented in this syllabus? Is my community's views, values, standpoints, and perspective represented in this syllabus? And I think what you'll find is oftentimes it is not. So first of all, you have to be prepared to represent your community. Number one, Ashe? And please do so at the highest level. That means showing up to class on time. I didn't get no Ashe. Let's start first, showing up to class. Let's start there first. And then showing up to class on time. And then, watch this, sitting in one of the first 2 rows. Not in the back. We fought too long to not have to sit in the back. But you're trying to hide. Stop trying to hide. The other thing is making sure that you're clear about what our standards are. You talked about the instrumental role that I played in ADES. They adopted the 15 standards of Afrocentric education that I developed. That development came about from looking at the landscape of education and hearing this buzzword, standards-based education. And it prompted me to ask the question, whose standards? Because they'll get a group of people together and say, well, these are the national standards, or these are the Common Core standards, or these are state standards. But what about our standards? The standards that are unique to us, that are in our best interest. If you're not clear about that, if you don't know your standards, other people will impose their standards on you. In the same way that if you don't know your purpose, people will impose their purpose for you on you. Is this making sense? And so we have to have a very clear vision in mind, not only for you as an individual, but for what's best for our communities. And understand that the Umoja program, programs like Amend and so forth, those grew out of the activism of students and administrators and Black administrators going all the way back to the 1950s and 60s, who said, if we're going to be on these campuses where our population is small, we will have a Black student union. We will have organizations that speak to our needs and who we are. You have to make sure that you take advantage of that. There are people who go to the State House, that write grants and advocate on your behalf so that there's funding for Umoja. so that there's funding for special projects, so that there's funding for travel abroad. For students just like you must take advantage of every single opportunity that is placed before you. People like Dean English and Dr. Cruz Soto, they're not going to tell you everything they're doing for you behind the scenes. And it's not expedient for them to. The thing for you to do is that when an opportunity comes, we must take advantage of it at every step of the way, knowing that somebody sacrificed something for us to have that opportunity. Ashe? Hope that answers the question.
No, you definitely did. I want to open it up to the audience. If my students don't ask a question, I will encourage them to ask a question. So, do we have a question? I see this young lady up front. I saw your hand first. You like to ask a question?
Yeah, and it's kind of like what you've been talking about a bit. Like, one of the great things that I love about our people is when we do stuff, we do it for all marginalized people. But sometimes I feel like we get lost in the sauce of all of that. And so when I'm talking about what we are experiencing as Black people, I feel a certain way when somebody cut me off and say, oh, well, we're going through that too, and we have this same thing. And then it's like, now all my attention has to go to what you're saying, but then I don't feel
Validated.
Yeah, so I'm like, how do you deal with stuff like that and then still bring it back to, hey, well, this is what we're experiencing without, like making them feel like unvalidated as well.
Right. That's a great question. I appreciate you asking that. Life first. Life first. In all things, for me, even though most of my melanin is on the inside. Black first. Life first. With much respect to my brothers and sisters of other ethnicities, what I found, just like you said, is that when we use the term students of color or people of color, Black ends up being last. Yeah. So I always put Black first. I always say Black students and students of color, Black people and people of color. At the same time, I'm mindful that strategic alliances are very, very important because we do share some common issues, right? And so it's very important that as you're educating yourself on our particular issues, that we look and see how that's affecting other marginalized communities as well, right? And even when I talked about the term people of color, this is actually something I always talk with my doctoral students about this, because when they use the term minority in their paper or something,
Right.
I have a problem with that term. I'm a former language arts teacher. And the root word of the term minority is what, class? Minor. We are not a minor anything. Not only that, people of color are the vast majority in the world, upwards of 85%. So when you live in a nation where you're told that majority rules and you refer to yourself as a minority, that has got to be the biggest psychological, political, sociological, spiritual power play in the history of planet Earth. So you are not a minority. But we have been minoritized, and there is a difference. We're made to feel less than or feel like we're inferior. So it's very important that you understand the particular issues of your community and then bond and unify with brothers and sisters of like minds of other communities as well, because that's what ultimately it's going to take. But as we create these strategic alliances across all cultures, it's very important that we understand, elevate, and celebrate all cultures, but remain firmly rooted in our own. So thank you for that question.
See, I saw Drea's hand second up. I don't meant to pass you up. Drea?
Oh, hi, hello. I just have one question. In the role of leadership, as an educator, what leadership quality from Dr. King do you think are essential for young people to cultivate in their own personal lives?
Great question. One of the first leadership qualities that we must master is communication skills. Verbal and nonverbal, how we present ourselves to the world matters. But Dr. King was a master communicator. He had the ability to speak not only across all sectors of the Black community, but across all ethnicities worldwide. The movement that he led here in America inspired the world. And so our communication skills have to be second to none. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be perfect in all situations. And you would probably be surprised to know that I used to be a very shy person that didn't want to speak at all. But when I discovered what my purpose was, it required me to speak. And so I had to begin to study that, cultivate that skill. So in terms of what's needed today, the first thing I think is communication skills, verbal as well as nonverbal. The second thing would be the ability to organize and mobilize people. Organize means to bring people together. Mobilize means to be on the move. Sometimes we're organized, but we're not on the move. We're not going anywhere. Other times we're mobilized, we're on the move, but we're not what? Organized, right? So organizing and mobilizing, when you look at the life of Dr. King, the members of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, that he led, when you look at the movement, one of the most important aspects of it was organized. If you've seen any video footage of any marches or demonstrations or meetings at the courthouse, all of those were carefully constructed. If you've ever seen Black people being terrorized and brutalized, even their nonviolent response to that, if you agree with that, they had to be trained for that. There's a place called the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee where they went to be trained. They went through simulations of people yelling at them, cursing at them, spitting at them, blowing cigarette smoke in there, all these pouring drinks on, all that kind of stuff, so that when they got in that setting, they would know how to respond, not with violence. Ashe? So they were trained for that. So we have to be very intentional, not only about our communication skills, but on how we organize and mobilize our people. Take a careful look at social media. It could be a tremendous tool for organizing if we use it correctly. But I'll stop at those three things. Communication skills, organizing, and mobilizing would be the first three things I think we have to be clear about.
For sure. We'll go by Isha first, okay?
Hi, thank you for sharing with us today. I was wondering, you brought up division, and I want to bring up within our community the family structure, men and the woman, and the lack of respect. And I think a lot of it has to do with conditioning, whether it be the media, whether it be governmental thing and structure, finances. How do we cultivate and begin and start over again with respect? Because I think collectively, family structure in Corgi been married for quite some time at their attention. So I want to know, because it seems as time goes by, generation after, it doesn't seem like it's getting better. And I observed other cultures, and they are close and tight-knit with the structure of family, being collective and building together.
Great question. Yes, this year my wife and I celebrated our 30-year wedding anniversary. Yes. Life loves Black power. In all things, I go back to who we were prior to our enslavement and colonization. What kind of relationships did we have before that? Because when we look at what it took to conquer different parts of Africa and to subdue Black people here in America, it required the separation of the Black man from the Black woman and the Black woman from the Black man. It required that we be divided and conquered. And so when you realize that that was an actual strategy that continues to this day, when Europeans went into Africa, they studied African culture and civilizations very carefully. And they were able to determine that these great civilizations were held together by strong relationships between Black men and women. And what they realized was that these great empires were only held together by these great relationships between Black men and women. You had these strong families that then became dynasties that ruled for centuries. I need to explain that again. You had strong families that became what? Dynasties. A dynasty is a family that rules for decades or centuries. Strong families that then became dynasties that ruled for centuries, when they reduced the civilization to its least common denominator, they said it's the relationship between the black man and the black woman. And so in order to gain and maintain dominance over black people, you must create that separation and keep that separation going. So I heard a recent statistic that only 34% of black people will be married, which is the lowest among any ethnicity. And that is not by chance. It's not due to some genetic deficiency or cultural deficiency on our part. It's due to systematic, multi-generational unaddressed trauma. Ashe?
Ashe.
And so one of the first things that we have to do as individuals is to confront some of our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors as it relates to relationships. Do a conscious review of your own family constellation and the relationships that you grew up seeing. And what did you see normalized? Was respect normalized? Was verbal abuse normalized? Was physical abuse normalized? Was poverty normalized? Was unemployment or underemployment normalized? Because all of these things have a factor on how relationships function. But if we are going to restore our people to their traditional greatness, one of the first things that we have to do is repair the breach between black men and black women. And it won't be done by pointing fingers at one or the other, because we're in this together. Ashe? Thank you for that question.
Wow. I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to go to Dr. Carter.
Okay. So subjectively I want to address that we've been systematically taught the mentality of black. So we say that if we put ourselves, I think we put ourselves in last is because we do it to ourselves. I noticed around campus, I'm in the nursing program, and I overhear conversation on others who are outside of us feel that they're entitled to the minimal resources that we get on this campus, and without provision, without them having to do anything. I've addressed one of my friends about it, and the one thing that came out of her mouth too was, well, it's free money. And I built some kind of way with that. I just feel that we as Black Americans have been taught to, or guilted into being the last. Like I remember years ago when I was in BSU for California, one of our motto was, to struggle is to find. And I just feel like we have this sense of lack because we feel like we are undeserved. And so when I speak to some people about what they come to Umoja, and if they're going to get and obtain the resources, there has to be gatekeeping, because I feel like I can't go to other equity groups and obtain their resources. But we don't even do it. We don't do it. But I feel like for us, it's like we're that pot that always gets picked out of. So I think that systematically, anytime we speak up about, okay, we don't want to be last, but I think we put ourselves in the last place because we just feel like we just have to give resources. We have to take care of everybody, and instead of our own first. But when we do it, is configured as militant or whatever like that. So how do you approach when you hear people, and I have to be careful about it too because I'm in the nursing program, when I'm hearing people like, oh, well, go over to Mojo, they'll give you free money, but you ain't even did the work. You don't come to the meetings, you ain't did this and that or whatever. And I feel like we're always used. We're always, and it's not just Umoja, it's across the gambit for Black equity groups. Like, we're that one. I remember one of the professors, I'm not going to name her name, but she was like telling us in the class, well, they have free money over at Umoja. But I'm just like, okay, y'all coming over here and y'all keep taking and taking and taking, but not giving. So how do we become gatekeepers? Because I feel like that's even throughout our culture too. Like we lose a lot of precedence in our own culture through hip hop, jazz, R&B, everything. It's like an erasure. So how do we do it to where, and I'm unapologetic, so I really go, whatever. But how do we do it to where just bureaucratically, just keep that gatekeeping streamlined
That
and
requires
fair?
that requires cultural custodians who are going to set, state, and uphold the standards. Set, state, and uphold the standards. And the reason I use the term cultural custodians, when you think of what a custodian does, a custodian keeps a building clean. They not only empty trash, they keep the area functional, okay? And Dr. King said, one of the things he said was, ultimately, he said this as a result of the sanitation workers strike, which happened in Memphis right before he was killed. Yeah. And people didn't understand why he was involved in that strike. And he said, ultimately, the sanitation worker and the doctor are of equal importance, because if we don't have doctors, then we can become sick and die. And if we don't have sanitation workers, then we can become sick and die because of a result of uncleanliness, right? So this requires cultural custodians who are going to set, state, and reinforce the standard. But in order to do that, you have to know what the standard is. So this requires, again, going back to what I said before, organizing and mobilizing the people. There has to be something about the way that we talk with people, the way that we embrace people, the way that we meet with people, that has a magnetic quality that makes them want to come back. And part of that is because they see us meeting needs and solving problems. When you look at some of the iconic civil rights, human rights, Black Power workers and so forth over the decades, you will find that they had a certain measure of magnetism that attracted people to them and that compelled them to stay, okay? And so part of it is in our socialization process, that when they do come to us, even if they come to us for the wrong reason, what are we doing to keep them? What are we doing to help them understand what their particular responsibility is to be a part of this organization? And so that's what I would offer. So first, I want to thank you for upholding that standard. But now the question is, how do we recruit others to set, state, and uphold that standard as well? I hope that gives some insight into that.
I'm going to go to one of our outstanding ethnic studies faculty, Dr. LaShanta Cart.
Thank you, Dr. Akua, for being here. Appreciate everything you share. I want to go back, that we can, to your protest and production and the means of production and what that looks like and knowing your purpose. I want to think about it in terms of what history has shown us is that Black people have had historically an agenda of self-determination, of liberation, of community and building together, self-leasing, trying to get businesses for yourselves. Like, that's not what's missing from our culture so much. So I want to think about what does self-determination look like in a white supremacist and anti-Black society? And I'm specifically saying anti-Black society to draw on your point. What's your name, Sweets?
Monica.
Monica, to draw on Monica's point. Yeah. Because we don't live in a vacuum. We don't exist in a vacuum, and we're existing in a society where these things are at play in our actions and how we move and how we mobilize. When you talk about the beetle moving the dung around and being able to get the highest order, that's need the best alignment, it's also interrupted in that process, right? We could get the best alignment if we're not interrupted, but we are interrupted. And with this new administration, right, that's going to look even more disruptive and interruptive. And so then how are we existing, or how do we think about self-determination and community policing and business ownership in the society that we exist in, because I don't want these young people walking away thinking that their best efforts, they're just not giving their best effort.
Right.
Because oftentimes we are giving our best effort, but we're hitting up against walls constantly and don't necessarily have the power infrastructure in order to break down those barriers the way that we would like or as expeditiously as we would like. So just so that we're not leaving them with the, you know, we need to mobilize better and organize better, because that's not all of it. That's not to say that there's not work that needs to be done in every community, but that's not the total story, right?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. One of the first things is to prepare yourself for a life of service by cultivating skills. So you're here in school to finish school, but not just finish school, but to cultivate a certain level of skill that can be of benefit to your people. So one of the things coming out of the enslavement experience that was a common thing in the Black community was you wanted to get educated because you couldn't advocate on behalf of your people properly if you were not, which is one of the reasons why education was kept from us. So one of the first orders of business was to get educated. So you want to make sure that you're cultivating specific skills that we need in whatever area that you're studying. Maybe you're studying psychology. Well, God knows we need some more counselors and therapists, Ashe? Maybe you're studying businesses. God knows we need more business owners and so forth. But when it comes to fortifying ourselves, one of the first things that all of us can do is when you leave here today, go home and look at how much money you spend in the course of a month. And examine what percentage of the money that you spend goes toward a Black business. The reason we were brought here, even though there were African people here thousands of years before Columbus knew the world was round, but that's a different presentation. But when we were brought here primarily for economic reasons. And that economic suppression and oppression continues. We are literally funding our own oppression by continuing to give our money to people and to corporations that have a demonstrated track record, not only that they don't like us, but that they are against us. And yet we continue to give them our money. We continue to just pour money into them during the holidays and all of these sorts of things. So as an individual, go back and look and see not how much you're spending with them, but how much you're spending with us. And if you're not satisfied with how much you're spending with us, and I suspect you won't be satisfied, you should check out BuyTheBlackMovement.com, BuyTheBlackMovement.com. I would recommend that you join them because they produce, these are quality Black-made products that are made and manufactured by Black people, and you can get on a monthly auto ship program you become a supporter. And they make things that we use every day, like laundry detergent, soap, all sorts of basic things that we need. And it can be done for as little as $30 to $40 a month. That's one way to at least plant the seed to begin to make the changes that we want to see. You may not be called to start a business, but you can support them, right? Okay. So that's one of the things that we can do to get on the road to improving ourselves. Another thing that I had to be particularly intentional about was to not be under non-Black economic or intellectual authority. Create my life in such a way that I am under my own intellectual and economic authority or somebody who looks like. Ashe?
Ashe.
I need that to settle in for a moment. I told a student that one time, it was like it didn't compute. Like, how do you even do that? One of the greatest blessings that I have is the freedom of time and the freedom to write and speak about the things that I deem important. And not enough of our people have that freedom because they have to get up and go to report to somebody that doesn't look like them every day, that doesn't have their best interests at heart every day. So this economic issue is very, very important. How much are we saving? How much are we investing so that we can have that same measure of autonomy to be able to speak truth when you need to and say what you need to say and do what you need to do. Those are just a few of the things that I hope would be helpful in that process.
And I have one more question. I'm coming to you, sweetheart. I have to get Dr. Akua back over to the brunch. So this is the last question. I'm sorry, but I want to go to you for the last question.
Can you elaborate on why study abroad programs are so important for Black students, and kind of share a little bit about your study abroad program?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Before I answer that, let me say some of the things I've said here, you'll hear me repeat some of them when you get to the next session, if you're going to the next session. But one of the reasons why study abroad is so important is because we need to link ourselves to brothers and sisters throughout the African diaspora. It opens your eyes and expands your horizons when you go to different parts of the world and you see people who look like you who are having very similar experiences. And then you begin to realize that the systems of racism and white terrorism are not a local or even a national problem, that this is a global phenomenon, okay? But you also begin to realize that our beauty, our self-determination, our amazingness is also not a local or national thing, that it's a global phenomenon that we haven't fully tapped into. So it's important to study abroad to expand your horizons, to see how other people live and approach life. Our Egypt study tour is designed to reintroduce you to your highest self by studying one of the most ancient civilizations, one of the best documented civilizations, the knowledge of which has been stolen from us. And it has largely been whitewashed. And so we're going to take, there's something different when you stand at the base of the Great Pyramid and understand that it's one of the seven wonders of the world and the only one that's still standing, and that it wasn't built by aliens, that your ancestors built this, right? There's something different about sailing the Nile and running your hands in the water. It's something different about walking through those temples and seeing where our ancestors studied the sacred sciences and how they built one of the greatest civilizations ever known. What happened? You will never know how far we have fallen until you see who we once were. And then you will realize why the knowledge of that has intentionally, strategically, and systematically been kept from us. And so that's one of the reasons why we do our study tour to Egypt. And we'll be rolling out some other study abroad opportunities as well. But we start with Egypt because that is the fountain of civilization, the fountain of human civilization. It started all in the Nile Valley. And while Kemet was at first, it was the best documented ancient civilization that we have. All of the Nile Valley civilizations of Nubia and Kush were high-tech civilizations. But Kemet, or Egypt, did the best job of documenting everything. And so when you go and you see how strategic and sophisticated that civilization was, you can never be the same again. So our tour is June 17th through the 29th of this year. You can go to travelwithdrakua.com to learn more information about travelwithdrakua.com. Now, you can also go on the Umoja Community Foundation website, and Umoja is sponsoring study abroad trips. So you may even be able to get the majority of the fees covered. So check with your Umoja coordinator about that. We would love to have you all on the journey. We already have a number of Umoja students who are going to be coming with us from other colleges. We would love to have some representation from here at Riverside. So thank you for that question.
Awesome question. This is the end. I apologize, but I think you could tell why we invited Dr. Akua to our campus. Please give him a round of applause. So especially for our students that took the time during winter session to be here, please give our students a round of applause. Thank you all so much. If you did not get a book, please check in with the front desk. Thank you all. Appreciate it.